Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of Dr. Tawad Gets Personal. In today's video, I'm going to share 5 life-changing experiences for me as a medical doctor. One happened to me while I was still a medical student, and the remaining happened during my practice. And this really defined me, and I want to share it with you so that you would understand how really fascinating practice can be, and it can make you a better person. So all this actually made me a better person, and I'm sure you're going to gain a thing or two in the course of this video. So if you're new to this channel and yet to subscribe, please subscribe and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss my new videos. And to my returning guys, thanks. I cannot appreciate you enough. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. Let's start with the first story. As I said, it happened while I was still in med school. We were in obstetrics and gynecology posting, and in my school it was the penultimate year. That means the year before your final year. Usually during your clinical postings, you are being shared into team and you follow the doctors, which include the consultants and the resident doctors, including the house officers. And you go around within an allocated time where you learn things, and what you learn are the clinical practices. On this particular day, we were going to have a ward rounds together with all the medical doctors, the senior doctors too. And what happens is that they share patients to us to clerk, and then after we finish clerking and doing the examinations, we would at different point in time present the cases to the consultants, where they will scrutinize us and ask us a lot of questions, and this is important to improve our clinical skills. What happens usually is that patients come and go. Some die, some survive. So many times you can come in and get new patients. So when we were going for the rounds, there was this young woman that I noticed, and she was a patient, and one of our colleagues in the team was being given the patient to clerk and present before the consultant. And in the course of she presenting to the consultant, we now realized that she was being managed for advanced CA cervix, that's cervical cancer. It's advanced, that spread from the cervix to other parts of the abdomen. And she is now at this stage, is usually palliative management. It means that you're just taking care of the person to make the patient as comfortable as possible, but there's really little you can do to reverse the condition. The person is eventually going to die. And this was a young woman, I think she was 35 years then, and I felt a huge pity for her. And that's one thing about medicine, it makes you realize how unfair life can be sometimes, and I had this kind of feeling towards her. But further down, when this colleague of mine was presenting the patient, and when it came to the social history, she now mentioned that the woman was still single with a history of multiple sexual partners, and she's currently being managed for HIV/AIDS and I think hepatitis, and coupled with this. And one of the organisms implicated in cervical cancer is the human papilloma virus, and the risk factor for being infected with this is having the history of multiple sexual partners. So when this was being mentioned, I noticed that immediately the pity that I had for her dropped, and part of me just felt she deserved it because of the lifestyle she had lived. And somehow, almost immediately, I heard a voice rebuke me, telling me that, so who am I to think that she deserves this? Why is it that I don't feel pity for her based on what she did? At that point in time, I really felt ashamed of myself. And who made me a judge? And part of why I say life is unfair is that good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. So I felt really ashamed of myself that I felt like that towards her. And I immediately dumped the idea, and since then it has helped me to really be compassionate towards patients and people, irrespective of what they've done before. I'm not the one to tell you deserve whatever it deserves or not. Mine is that when you come needing medical attention, I provide it to you without any restraint. I show you the same degree of commitment, the same degree of concern that I have towards any other person. So this event really showed me how easily we could have bad tendencies, and I'm happy that I learned it that early enough, which had helped me in subsequent interaction with my patients. Have you ever had that kind of judgmental mindset? They believe some people deserve some things also. I don't really think it's the way to go. Now we'll go to our second story. My second story is about when I was doing my housemanship in Nigeria, and I started with pediatrics. And I remember just a few days after I started my pediatric housemanship, we had a patient, I think it was about 4 or 5 years old, a boy, who was being brought unconscious with a very high temperature and was breathing noisily. The child had a wound that was obviously infected in the legs, and while he was having that wound, based on the history we were able to extract, the parents really didn't pay attention to it till it became very infected and entered his bloodstream, and then eventually he lost consciousness and was being brought in this state. So we were attending to the boy, and he was with us for about 5 days, and throughout that time he was unconscious. Very expensive drugs were being used to manage him. On the 5th day, we noticed that the boy suddenly regained consciousness, and we're very happy. He was even maintaining eye contact. This was someone that was on IV fluid and he was being fed with the NG tube. If you don't know the NG tube, it's the nasogastric tube, which is passed from the nose through the throat into the stomach. So for unconscious patients, this is how they're being fed to maintain their nutritional state, since they are not conscious enough to swallow. And this boy just suddenly regained consciousness, maintaining eye contact, attempting to talk. We were very happy. And one thing about pediatrics I'm really fascinated about is that children can easily recover compared to adults. So no matter how bad a child is, there are higher chances that it could be reversed compared to adult patients. So we're just thinking this was one of these things. Very excited. We're all excited. And then a few hours later, the boy died. So this puzzled me, and I spoke with a senior colleague as to what happened and the rest. And that's when I learned about the term terminal lucidity. Let me explain terminal lucidity to you. It's actually found in neurological conditions that has to do with the brain. Does it? Forgive our jargons again. It's a state in which someone has been in a very bad state neurologically. They just lost touch with reality and they're bad, they're deteriorating, and then all of a sudden they regain full consciousness and full control of their brains. They're able to communicate, interact, even engage in activities. So some of them just suddenly become strong, and then afterwards they slide back into the previous conditions and die. And this could last for minutes, hours, days, weeks, sometimes even months, and then they die. So you just see that a patient that was not doing well suddenly starts doing well. And most times when this happens, just know that that person will eventually die. The phenomenon is still not being understood properly, but this happens. In the course of my practice, I've seen that happen a couple of times. So as a health worker, have you ever noticed that? If you're not a health worker, have you ever heard about that, or if you've experienced that as a patient's relative? Let me know in the comment section below. We'll now move to the third story. This still happened while I was in pediatrics. One day, a woman came in with her child. And from the way she dressed, you know that these are people that are poor. You could know that. And she brought this child that was wasted. Like, wasted for us means the child was extremely thin. He had lost significant weight. And this child looked like someone that had been sick for a while. He was referred from a neighboring hospital because they couldn't have enough bed space. This happens very well in Nigeria. He was being referred to our place. So when they brought him, we were able to quickly assess him and discover that he had an acute abdomen, which means he had a problem with his tummy. It's a surgical condition, so we need surgery or else it's going to be a problem. However, this woman was poor. She couldn't afford the surgery. And the great thing was that we were able to talk with the MDS at that time, who was a general surgeon. He really subsidized the amount for them. Definitely you have to pay because for the surgery to happen, a lot of consumables are being used and these need to be replaced. So if you don't pay, the hospital will run at a loss and they wouldn't be able to eventually help others that will need the help, and that's why you need to pay up. Although there are social services that will help. Well, as of that time, the social services were not around. It was in the night that this happened and it was an emergency surgery. So based on the surgical team assessment, they saw that the boy will need a surgery which will improve his chances of surviving, because if he didn't have the surgery, was not going to survive at all. And the mother was being informed about it. So she consented to allowing the surgery to happen. And you know how we are in Africa. We usually hand things over to God. But she dropped something and went over to the house to be able to raise the remaining money to come and pay for the treatment and other things. When she came back, that's when we realized that she went back to sell some of her properties. She was a widow that lost her husband not too long ago. And that's how she was struggling with this boy. The boy came out of the surgery alive. However, a few hours later, he died. And this was extremely painful to us because we really wish the boy would survive. These are cases that you see people that have made efforts and you really wish the outcome was favorable to them. With the effort the mother had made, she really deserved the child surviving. But unfortunately, that's medical practice for you and that's life for you. He lost his life and she told us that okay, she will go home to inform the family about it and then they'll come and carry the child for burial. In Nigeria, children are not being kept for long after they die and they're being buried immediately. So after she came back, like a few minutes later, we saw a huge chunk of people walk into our department with a couple of men and women, and they came to carry the dead body of the boy. And they said they were relatives of the boy. I felt really sad. I felt puzzled because where were these people when the boy was alive? This was a question I couldn't ask at that time. And it just buttresses the fact, which I've seen the course of my practice and the course of my stay in Nigeria, that we usually have more respect for the dead than the living. You would see someone really struggle during the time of sickness and eventually die without significant support. But once the person dies, if you see the number of people that come to support, it's really puzzling. Many customs, many families spend exorbitant amounts of money for burials. They organize feasts, even the money for the coffin sometimes we send off for the treatment of the person, but that's what happens. And it's just sad that that boy's life would have been saved if early support was being given to this woman. And the disease was definitely initially a simple thing that wasn't treated properly till it progressed to reach this stage. But yes, the dead are always more respected than the living in my part of the world. The next story is another sad one. Sorry, today's stories are just sad ones, so bear with me. This one happened while I was working again in Nigeria, and there was this man that we've been managing for HIV encephalopathy. Again, another jargon. He had HIV AIDS that wasn't being managed well. What I mean by it not being managed well is that most times there are these antiretroviral drugs and they are free. But quite a lot of the patients don't usually take their drugs, and that's the problem we always have with most of the patients on antiretroviral therapies. So this man, it got complicated and he now had a brain issue. So yes, in summary, that's HIV encephalopathy. He lost consciousness for a while. In the course of losing consciousness, he had been convulsing multiple times, which was eventually arrested in the hospital. But even after the convulsion stopped for a while, he was unconscious, and gradually he regained consciousness. But in the course of regaining consciousness, he became blind and still couldn't use his limbs, that's the hand and the legs, but gradually he was able to use them and be able to move around with support. All this while, the wife was there with him. And because he was in the hospital for months and the wife was there with him all through, she even became familiar with all of us, and she was our friend, like the team friend. And even in the ward that they were, she was popular amongst everybody there. Very dedicated woman. Eventually, he was being discharged to be seen as an outpatient. That means he will be coming to the clinic so that the team is monitoring him, and he will also be undergoing physiotherapy to improve the use of his limbs and also go through some form of rehabilitation since he's blind. We had to bid our farewells with the wife. Eventually we'll be seen at the clinic. But one day, like a couple of weeks after they were being discharged, I remember that they asked the emergency because I was on call and there was a dead body that was being brought. That means the person was brought in dead. When the patient is being brought in unconscious, we assess the patient first to confirm whether the patient is dead or not because of medical legal issues. So we confirmed the person was dead, and lo and behold, the corpse turned out to be that of the man's wife. I was so shocked because this woman looked very lively. She looked okay. Yeah, once in a while she would look exhausted, and we had assumed that it was the exhaustion of prolonged stay in the hospital taking care of this man. It was then that the relatives told us that she had been struggling with hypertension, and at this point in time she had a very bad stroke and didn't survive it. And it's sad that this woman was right under our nose and struggling with a medical condition, but because all our focus was on this man, even her focus was on her husband, she forgot about herself, and unfortunately she lost her life. So this taught me to always ask, not just my patient, but my patient's relatives, how they're doing. Because some might appear strong, but you have no idea how much they're struggling. And help is right there, but because of ignorance, they wouldn't be able to access it. I knew that if we're able to review her properly, I was in the medical team, so hypertension is definitely something the medical team can handle. And that's how we overlook a lot of things. So please, if you are the patient's relative, in the course of focusing on your relative, please take care of yourself too. And while you're in the hospital, let the health workers know what you're struggling with, and proper attention will be given to you too. Now we'll move to the last story. And this happened while I was doing private practice in Nigeria. One Saturday, a man was being brought to the hospital I was working. He was in severe pain. It was a severe abdominal pain that started a day before. So in the course of me taking my history, which is asking questions to be able to know what's wrong with the patient, I realized that he was a commercial motorcyclist that had a head-on collision with another motorcyclist, and he fell on his abdomen. But because he noticed that there was no bleeding or anything, he just stood up. His bike was fine. He just stood up, picked his bike and went home. However, he started experiencing pain, which continued getting worse till he couldn't bear it and he was being brought to the hospital. Based on our assessment, it's possible that he had an internal bleeding in the abdomen, which was causing him to have this kind of pain. So he needed an urgent surgery. And that was my assessment. We were able to confirm it with an ultrasound scan too, which was at the hospital. And forgive me, in hospitals you must drop deposits, you must drop something. It's very important. But this was a genuine emergency. So we told them about the financial implication of the thing, and we're going to move him to the theater. However, while we're in the theater, they can drop this, and it was going to save his life. And they were discussing about money, that the money was too high. And I was able to speak with the MD to reduce the deposit significantly, which he did. But then one of the relatives, because the relatives were the ones that brought him, I would say that they know someone that works in the general hospital around the area, so they were going to just take him there, because general hospitals, government hospitals, are usually cheaper than private hospitals, and we allowed them go on economic grounds. But we know how some of these general hospitals are, especially on Saturdays. So within the week, I was just walking around the neighborhood and I saw an obituary poster, and it happened to be the man. I could recall that because of the man's name, and it was the man. He had died, and he was in his mid-40s. He survived by a wife and 2 children, and this is sad because I really believe this death was preventable. Definitely, if I had moved into the theater that day, I would have been able to arrest the bleeding and correct whatever it was. But wrong calls were being made, and who are we to stop you? We can't. If it's an adult, what will we do? And I am sure of this, that even if the bike was being sold, that bike will have covered for the entire treatment, because it wasn't really that expensive per se. But because many times the people could make the call when you are not in the right state to make it, are not properly informed, it might cost your life. And this had made me very deliberate to discuss with my wife on possible actions to take in scenarios where I cannot make them myself, as it could cost me and it will eventually cost her. If you have a spouse, if you discuss this continuously. If you don't, you definitely have relatives and friends. Usually hospitals recognize relatives more than friends, so you discuss this with your relatives in case it's going to go a long way for you. And it's just terrible how wrong calls could cost people. So what do you think about the video? What do you think about these stories? These stories really changed my life. They changed how I practiced as a doctor, so how I discuss this, how I handle things, and I'm sure that you're able to pick a lesson or two in the course of this. If you did, let me know in the comment section. If you're still around and you're here to subscribe, especially if you enjoy contents like this, please subscribe and turn on the bell notification. Thank you, and I will see you in my next video.